everyone, welcome. I'm Stephanie, and today I'll be sharing everything I read, listened to, and crafted in the month of March. First up, we have Two Bodies Are Better Than One by Erica Ruth Neubauer. This is part of a duology of the Lorraine Highsmith mysteries and was published in March of this year. So this was a mystery thriller I found through Amazon Prime First Reads for the month of March. This is my first book by this author, but she has written several other books in her Jane Wonderly series, and that has won an Agatha Award. But this appears to be her first book outside of that series. The story was just okay for me. The primary detective is the only female officer in this police department, but goes by the name Mike. Her name is Michaela. So even though she wants to try to break through this misogyny, she really puts up with a lot of the comments and the sexism from the department and all the other males in the department. And that was really frustrating to read. And I understand it took place in the 80s. And in the reality of the 80s, there was a lot of misogyny within many workplaces, but didn't make it any less frustrating to read. Other than that, it was kind of a convoluted, mediocre mystery. The book didn't add much else to the body of literature. Overall, I gave Two Bodies Are Better Than One 2 stars. Next up, we have Native Son by Richard Wright. This was originally published in March of 1940 and falls under classic fiction genre. I read this as part of Nicole's book club over at Noteworthy Fiction, which I'll link below. This story follows Bigger Thomas. He's a black man in 1930s Chicago. And I don't want to give too much of the plot away, but the book is structured into 3 parts called Fear, Flight, and Fate. They follow 3 distinct circumstances Bigger finds himself in, and I will say I was shocked at the end of each of the sections. I had no prior knowledge of this story. The writing was extremely well done. It takes you into the mind of Bigger, into his thoughts and feelings at each moment and each turn of the story, and I felt like I was right there with him. I was shocked, appalled, scared, nervous, very vivid, and very descriptive writing. The book clearly has a narrative and reflection on the state of Black Americans in the era of the 1930s and 40s. However, I feel like it resonates even for contemporary society, which in a lot of ways hasn't changed much from the 1930s and 40s. The version I read also includes an essay by Richard Wright called How Bigger Was Born. And this details a timeline of Richard's life and the characters and people that he knew that contributed to Bigger and how he was formed from many real people. So I gave Native Son by Richard Wright 4.75 stars. For completeness sake, the next book I finished was The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon, Volume 5 by Beth Brower. But if you've watched any of my other videos, you know I love this historical fiction book series, and I won't belabor that here. If you're new, the series follows Emma M. Lyon. She's a young woman in London in the late 19th century, navigating life and society as a single female with no family to really speak of, and very moderate financial means. So it's witty, it's quirky, it's emotional, it has the most adorable characters. So of course, I gave Volume 5 of Emma M. Lyon 5 stars. Next up, we have The Correspondent by Virginia Evans, which was published in April of 2025 and is a contemporary literary fiction. I listened to this on audiobook, but this book has been all over BookTube and Book Talk. It is nominated for several book awards, including a debut book award, although I did find another book by this author that she published in 2015, so not quite sure how it qualifies for the debut book. The story takes place from 2012 to 2019, and it follows Sybil Van Antwerp, a retired divorced lawyer in her 70s as she writes letters to her friends, neighbors, family members, and a few famous people along the way. I think listening to this on audiobook was a mistake of mine. The book was read with several different voice actors, being that it's told in letters back and forth. But even so, I found it challenging to follow the details very well. And it read all of course, the addresses, the email addresses, the subject lines, which I normally would have skimmed over when reading. So I think I found myself sort of zoning out sometimes and then not coming back in. But overall, it was an interesting story. It had some modern elements like DNA testing through the perspective of someone in their later decades of life. So it gives you that like hesitancy and skepticism of new things that sometimes the older generation can have. But it also brings the hubris of like not being afraid to ask. And protagonist in this book, Sybil, is certainly not afraid to ask questions. So I did give The Correspondent by Virginia Evans 4 stars. Next is The Valley of the Horses by Jane M. Auel. This is the second book of the Earth's Children series and was originally published in 1982 and falls under, I would say, historical fiction genre. So this continues to follow our same protagonist that we had in the first book, Ayla, and she has left the tribe and is out in the valley, as hence the name, on her own, and is adventuring around and finds some animals that she sort of befriends, makes a little place for herself. So you have that storyline, and then you also have the storyline of two brothers who were out on a journey. They are from a different tribe, and remember, Ayla in the first book was raised by Neanderthals, but she is not. She is one of what they call the others, which would be more modern Homo sapien. And these two brothers are of that same tribe as well. As you would expect, their paths do intersect at some point, though it does take a little bit of time to get there. I thought the story was good. I wasn't as enamored with it as I was with the first book. I will probably continue to read the series, although I have heard it kind of goes down as further and further you get. But I am still interested. I love the Ice Age setting of it, the prehistoric setting. So I find that to be very interesting. I do like how it details a lot of the daily life, or what we anticipate daily life might have been like for these characters. So I actually find all of that very interesting. I still enjoyed the story. Again, I just wasn't as compelled, or maybe it wasn't as novel as the first one. And maybe that's where I wasn't as engaged with the story. But still fantastic. And overall, I gave this 4.5 stars. Next up was Immaculate Conception by Ling Huang. This was published in May of 2025 and falls under the science fiction horror genre. So this was the March fiction pick for the Anti-Brain Rot Reading Challenge, hosted by Janany of This Story Ain't Over and Boundless Press Publishing, which I'll link below. The theme for March was artificial intelligence. So this story follows Inka and Mathilde, two students from different backgrounds that are both attending the Berkshire College of Art and Design. They eventually form a tight-knit bond, but as Mathilde's popularity in the art world skyrockets, Inka is sort of left in the background, struggling for her voice. The story follows them through life. They do grow further and further apart until one day Mathilde disappears and Inka is the only one who knows where to find her. And this creates a turning point in the story, and where it takes a more of a hardcore sci-fi turn. But it's told in alternating time periods of then and now, so back and forth in time, which I did really enjoy. I didn't feel the AI theme was very strong within the story. We're told of an AI-driven digital art archive that's been created, and this is forcing the need for artists to push further and further out of the box. And there is a strong sort of future technology theme, which is why I felt like it categorizes more towards sci-fi, but I'm not certain it fits fully into the AI element. But overall, I gave Immaculate Conception 4 stars. Next up was The Scrub Oak by Georgia Carter Smith. This was published in August of 2025 and falls into the historical fiction, maybe memoir category. So this story is about Georgia Carter Smith, and from what I can tell, it was written down by her in her later years of life and then found by her children, who edited it and published it as a book. So she was born as one of 5 children in 1926 on the cusp of the Great Depression. So after the death of their father, the youngest 2 children, which includes Georgia, are sent to the Tulsa Home for Children, and she undergoes some horrible experiences at the hand of her adoptive mother and is eventually returned to the orphanage. It's a hard story to read. There are definitely some trigger warnings, so if you're interested in reading this book, I would check those out. I do think it's a story that needs to be told about the way families and children, specifically children, were treated in this time, and unfortunately are still treated now sometimes. What I think I struggled with was the inconsistency in the writing. So at the beginning of the story, with the younger version of Georgia, it's heavy in dialect, short, choppy sentences, which I think mirrors the education of the main character, and it makes sense to me. It was a little challenging to read, but it made sense. Then once she's adopted, I feel the language kind of more modern features. I'm not sure if that was the family filling in some of the story from what they had found, or if it was how Georgia did write that part of it when she wrote it down. But it just felt very inconsistent. The family does provide information about Georgia's life at the end of the book, so you do get that as an afterword, and that is nice to know that she went on to be very successful, did fine and flourished, and that's wonderful. Just felt a little choppy for me. I did end up giving Scrub Oak 2 stars. Next up is The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. This was probably my most interesting read of the month. So it was published in March of 2025 and falls under the horror genre. This recommendation came to me from Elizabeth of Plant-Based Bride, which I'll link below. I really appreciate her in-depth reviews and reading blogs, so please check her out if you like those types of videos. She talks very highly of the horror genre, and it's never anything that I have been interested in reading and never have read before. So in my effort to read beyond my comfort zone that I'm trying to do this year, I thought I would give the horror genre a try, and she highly recommended this book. She recommended it specifically on audiobook, which is what I did, and I was pleasantly surprised. The story is told by Etsy Beaucarnet, who has found a journal/essay written by her greatest grandfather, Arthur Beaucarn. The document details an encounter he had with a local Native American of the Bikuni tribe in Montana called Good Stab. So Good Stab is seeking a confession from Arthur, who is the local Lutheran pastor, and whom he called 3 persons, which I loved and made me giggle, meaning the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, which I thought was great. And from there, a wild story blossoms. So what I appreciated the most is that Stephen Graham Jones uses the horror genre to explore larger themes, but not to scare. So it's sort of the subplot, and there are themes in this that are certainly horror, but I wasn't scared at any point. I could have done without some of the graphic descriptions of the gore, but that's a personal preference. If I'm going to read more horror, I probably will have to compromise on that. Other themes that come through with this book are cultural erasure of the Native Americans by the white Caucasians in the early 20th century, religion, struggle of good self versus bad self, and how confession can play a role in that, memory versus storytelling, and reality versus perception. There are two distinctive voices, Arthur and Goodstab. You don't get a lot more from Etsy until the end of the book. I wasn't really sure what her point was, and the part of the book at the end that includes her, I kind of found cheesy. I understand what they were trying to do to sort of tie the whole story back to the present. I don't know. I didn't think it added a whole lot, and I think it would have been executed better if maybe having Etsy's voice break through a few more times during the book, because I sort of forgot that she was even a character until the end. The book does evoke a lot of emotion, not just from the events that are occurring, but also from the reflection from the characters. I think this is probably a book that would take you a couple times of reading it to fully understand and digest everything that you read. But overall, I gave The Buffalo Hunter 4 stars. Next up, we have Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And this version, well, not this version, but the one I read on my Kindle was translated from Greek by Del Rey Koshan. This one is translated by Gregory Hayes. And I do plan to compare this translation to the one I read on my Kindle, but I haven't done that yet. This was originally written in 180 AD, was not written to be a book, so was not published back then, but was eventually published, and falls under classic philosophy, specifically the Stoic philosophers. All right, this was written by Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. It's a collection of his personal and spiritual reflections, essentially his private journal, on how he wanted to live a meaningful life. I came across this when I was on a website, and it mentioned that this book had changed the person's life. And I was a little skeptical of that, but curious. So I picked it up, and I really resonated with the themes in this book. The prevailing themes are about how you should control your reaction to things, you can't control the events around you, living according to reason and nature, accepting fate, being virtuous and humble. I think it teaches that a good life comes from inner discipline, rational thinking, accepting reality, and moral integrity, not from external successes or comfort. So I think it agreed with sort of how I like to live my life and the principles with which I try to abide by. It really fell in line with me. It made a lot of sense to me, and I'm very eager to read it again and see what else I can get from it. I don't have any tabs, but my Kindle has a ton of notes on it, and hoping to translate that into this with some notes and more annotations. So I gave Meditations by Marcus Aurelius 5 stars. Next up, we have The Q by Beth Brower. This was originally published in 2016 and falls under historical fiction. So this is written by the same author that writes the Emma M. Lyon journals. It follows the story of Quincy St. Clair, who runs a periodical in England in the town of Reeston, sometime in the 19th century. So it follows her as a young woman running a business. She is an orphan, so she's very much no nonsense, no time for people, no time for emotions, down to business, get things done, survive, survive, survive. I can feel that a little bit. I'm not an orphan, but I understand her dogged determination to make sure that this business runs well. We follow her, and certainly she has characters she interacts with that are going to challenge her in many ways, emotionally and on the business front. This book I really enjoyed. I thought the story was emotional. I teared up a little bit at certain points where I felt the writing was just very raw and real, and at least in terms of how I think I would have reacted to the situation, I felt the same as Quincy. I felt the frustration, the sadness, the joy, the anger, the hurt, all of the things she felt, I felt along with her. So definitely, if you enjoy the Emma M. Lyon series or that genre, historical fiction sounds interesting to you, would definitely recommend trying The Q by Beth Brower. I gave this 5 stars. And our last book is No Great Mischief by Alastair MacLeod. This was published in 1999 and is part of literary fiction. This I read as part of my TBR Rewind series, where I'm tackling my TBR from bottom to top. So for the full review of this book, go ahead and check out that video linked below. So that's all for my March reads. Overall, we had 10 books, 2,562 pages, and 20 hours and 2 minutes of audiobook. I read 90% fiction, 10% nonfiction, and my most read genre for the 3rd month in a row was historical fiction. And the average rating was 4.13 stars. So better month than February. Now let's spin the wheel and see what we're going to start on for April. And we're back. So I was not able to find this at my library or on Libby, so I ended up ordering it from thrift books. So here it is. And let me read you an excerpt. How to Read explores the politics and ethics of reading and insists that we are capable of something better, a more engaged relationship not just with our fiction and our art, but with our buried and entangled histories. Smart, funny, galvanizing, and sometimes profane, Castillo attacks the stale questions and less than critical proclamations that masquerade as vital discussion, reimagining the cartography of the classics, building a moral case against the subtler colonialism of lauded writers like Joan Didion, taking aim at Nobel Prize winners, and toppling indie filmmakers. Okay, so collection of essays, it seems. It is 314 pages long. So check back in our weekly wrap-ups to see how we're getting along with this book. Now on to crafting. So if you watched my last video for February, you know that I did not craft very much. And one of my goals this month was to do more of that. So I made a little more progress on my diamond painting. We're about a third of the way done with that. Not as much as I would have liked, but got a little bit more done. Have done nothing on my cross stitch. However, I am going to be working on that Friday. I'm doing a craft night with friends, so plan to make deliberate progress on this. And again, hope to work on that more in the coming month. And that's all I have for you today. If you enjoyed this wrap up, go ahead, like and subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel. Drop in the comments what books, craft projects you've been working on, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.